You're generating heat. Welcome to Biola Sauna. I'll be leading you in sweating this morning. Hopefully I don't pass out. That's my goal. Wow. Are you guys hot? Okay, let's forget about that now. When I was on that road, let me get rid of this, sorry. There we go. When I was on that road from Jerusalem to Jericho, I too experienced danger right after we shot the video. And you don't want to use that word in everywhere that you go. We shot some video. Just don't use the word shot, film majors. I noticed a group of young men walking towards us. There was nowhere for them to go. We were in the middle of nowhere. We had been there for about 3 hours. Nobody had passed by. And it didn't look good. I was starting to get nervous. And then our Israeli guide said, grab the gear. Let's get out of here. We were a bunch of foreigners. We had thousands of dollars in film equipment. I started getting ready with my speech because I had promised my wife that I would be safe in Israel. So I was going to tell them, please don't beat me up. I told my wife I'd be safe and I would come back. I have 2 kids back in America. Please don't do anything. And they walked up to us, and you want to hear the rest of the story, don't you? Because stories are powerful, aren't they? Yes, thank you. Just making sure you're there with these spotlights, I'm not quite sure. Because if you're not, I'm going to go get some air conditioning and maybe that frozen t-shirt. Stories are powerful. Well, in this story, nothing happened. They walked right past us. To this day, I don't know where they were going. I believe that the Lord protected us that day. But stories are still powerful, aren't they? Thank you, thank you. A good story invites us in, it captivates us, and that's the theme of this year's chapels. It's spirit and story. And we're going to start off telling some of Jesus' stories, his parables. And in fact, we're going to start off these first 3 chapels with the parable of the Good Samaritan. Today, I'm going to talk about the first century context of this parable. On Friday, Dr. Joanne Jung will come and talk about the biblical context of the same parable. Yeah, go ahead. Not too much, though. Remember, you're generating heat. And then on Monday, Dr. Chris Grace will come in and talk about the modern context of this parable. How do we live it out today? He has studies in altruism on doing good to other people, so that's going to be interesting. So 1 story, 3 chapels, 3 contexts. Here we go. Let's read the passage for the Good Samaritan, Luke 10, 25 to 29. It's on the screen, right? On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What's written in the law? Jesus replied. How do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. We expect the story to end there. But this expert wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In Jesus' day, lots of people were asking these deep theological questions about eternal life, and it's possible that the expert just wanted to engage with Jesus in a theological discussion. Kind of like after Tanis's Theo 1 class, right? You're standing out in the hall, someone says something about the Theo 1 class, and Tanis walks by and says, that's good theology. Right? Although I don't think he says that as much anymore. I asked him yesterday if he still says that, and he said, why would I give that up? No reason to. But it's also possible that the expert wanted to do as little as possible. He wanted a definition of neighbor. He wanted to love God and neighbor, but he didn't want to do too much, right? Sometimes we're that way too. I don't want to go overboard with this love stuff. Well, what did neighbor mean for Jews in Jesus' day? Well, most of them thought that neighbor referred just to fellow Jews, not to Gentiles, not to Samaritans. Leviticus 19:18 on the screen, there it is, says, "Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." So you see the parallelism there in that passage. Among your people and neighbor are parallels. So neighbor seems to be defined as a fellow Jew, someone from your people. My guess is that the expert of the law was trying to get Jesus to say, yeah, your neighbor is a fellow Jew, and you have loved your neighbor. Good job, expert in the law. Jesus easily could have gone back into the Old Testament and quoted a scripture, but he didn't do that. He told a story, because stories are powerful. Thank you. So he tells the story. Let's continue reading in Luke 10, starting in verse 30. In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers," as I almost was. "They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him," or he had compassion on him. "He went up to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' And then Jesus asked the expert, 'Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?' The expert in the law replied, and notice that he doesn't even use the word Samaritan, says, 'The one who had mercy on him.' Jesus told him, 'Go and do likewise.'" This 17-mile road that you saw in the video from Jerusalem to Jericho, it's hilly, it's barren, it's the wilderness, it's desert. It's been dangerous throughout history, as I mentioned. Lots of caves there so robbers can hide out, and they can come and they can rob you and then go back into hiding. The man in this parable, it's a parable, it's not a true story, but it could be true, right? He was walking down this road and he was attacked by robbers. He was beaten, he was stripped, and he was left half dead. But he's in luck, isn't he? There's a priest who happens to be walking down that same road. No problems for this half-dead man. Many priests in Jesus' day lived in Jericho, and they would make that 17-mile trek up this road to Jerusalem when it was their turn to serve in the temple. And it appears in the parable here that this priest had already served, and he's returning home to Jericho. Now, the text doesn't tell us everything, but many priests, in fact, most priests of Jesus' day, were pretty wealthy. So we assume, and I think it's a good assumption, that this priest was probably riding on a donkey. So he had the means to give a ride to this beaten up man. But should the priest help a half-dead man? It seems like a silly question, but it's not in Judaism. Because in Judaism, if a priest goes within 6 feet of a dead person, you know what happens. They become unclean, ceremonially unclean, and that's not good. If he becomes unclean, he can't be a priest. He can't do his priestly duties. In fact, he would have to go back up to Jerusalem to the temple and spend probably a week getting clean again. It would take time, it would take money, and maybe the priest just didn't want to do that. He didn't want to spend the time and money. Now, some Jews thought that it was okay for a priest to go near a dead body. In fact, there's a text from the Mishnah that pops up magically. Oh, not that one. There we go. It says that corpse uncleanness allows for exceptions in the case of finding a neglected corpse. So it's possible that this priest, if he finds a neglected dead person, which is the case in this parable, out in the desert there, he could go up to him and he could take care of him. So maybe the priest didn't have to go help this person, but he could have if he chose to. Or maybe he was afraid, as I was on that road. Maybe he was afraid of the robbers. They had beaten up this man. If he was a wealthy priest, maybe he was afraid that he would be next. So he passes by on the other side of the road. Or maybe the priest wasn't sure if it was a Jewish person lying there on the road or if it was a Gentile. or a Samaritan? How do you tell if someone is a foreigner or a fellow Jew? Well, clothes and accent, right? If you've ever traveled overseas. When I lived in Spain for 6 years, almost everybody thought that I was a German. Tall, blonde, blue eyes. And they would walk up to me and not many times, sometimes they would speak German to me and I would respond to them in Spanish and they would hear my accent and they would say, americano. Sí, soy americano, lo siento. The man was beaten and stripped of his clothes, so the priest couldn't look at his clothes to see if he had the latest in Jewish fashion or the latest in Gentile fashion. He was half dead, so he couldn't speak, so he couldn't talk to listen for his accent. So he didn't know if he was a foreigner. If he was a foreigner, would the priest have to help him? Well, this was debated among first century Jews. Leviticus, the chapter that we read earlier to define neighbor, goes on later in verse 34, and it says this. It says, now we're at Leviticus 19:34. I'll just read it. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. So the foreigner should be treated just like someone who's a fellow Jew. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So it seems pretty clear from Leviticus 19. But there were many texts, many Jewish texts, not in the Old Testament, that said that Jews shouldn't help foreigners. And they based this off of the Old Testament. This is pretty complex. We won't get into it. But let me just go through the evidence really quickly. There's a rabbinical text, maybe after the time of Jesus, but probably captures the idea of many of the Jews in Jesus' day, which says that heretics should be pushed into the ditch and not pulled out. Nice. I practiced last night with my 14-year-old son, and I added nice there, and he goes, yeah, nice, Dad. That's really nice. I said, are you still listening, son? Oh, yeah, I'm listening. I wasn't sure. Just like, no. A midrash on the Old Testament book of Ruth says that if a Gentile, non-Jewish person, is in danger of death, we are not bound to deliver them. If any of them fall into the sea, you don't need to take them out. Just don't help them. The wisdom of Jesus ben Sirach, which is early 2nd century BC, says, if you do good, know to whom you do it. Give to the devout, but do not help the sinner. Do good to the humble, but do not give to the ungodly. For the Most High also hates sinners and will inflict punishment on the ungodly. Give to the one who is good, but do not help the sinner. Wow. In Qumran, a Jewish settlement near the Dead Sea, near Jericho actually, the text says, I shall have no mercy for those who deviate from the path. I will not comfort the oppressed until their path is perfect. So in other words, get your act together and then come and God will comfort you. It's a little bit sad. Now there's lots of other texts that we could look at, and there's a lot of texts that aren't quite so negative towards Gentiles and towards foreigners. There were lots of business dealings that Jews interacted with Gentiles, so it's complex, but the bottom line here is that the priest could have helped this man, even if he were a foreigner, even if he were dead, if he wanted to help him. But he had enough theological, and I'll put that in quotes, theological reasons to avoid this half-dead, possibly foreign man, if he wanted to. Regardless of the reason, the text doesn't tell us anyway what the reason is. The priest passes by on the other side of the road. But there's no need to fear. There's a Levite coming along, so we're okay. I know you've heard this story lots of times, so you know how it ends, but pretend that you're hearing it for the first time. Here comes the Levite. Levites helped priests in the temple. That was their job. And the Levite probably saw that the priest hadn't helped this half-dead man, because you can see a long ways down that road. I'm sure the Levite knew that the priest was traveling ahead of him. And the Levite probably concluded, if the pious priest didn't help him, I shouldn't either. Besides, I might get robbed too. And so the Levite passes by on the other side of the road. So after mentioning the priest and the Levite, we expect Jesus to talk about a Jewish common person, a lay person, but he doesn't do that. In his story, he mentions a Samaritan, a hated Samaritan. See, Jews and Samaritans didn't like each other. They hated each other for the most part. We call this the parable of the Good Samaritan, don't we? But for most Jews in the first century, there were no good Samaritans. Can I say that again? There were no good Samaritans. In fact, the Jewish people, many of them called the Samaritans the stupid people. Sirach chapter 50 says, there's two nations that my soul detests. The third is not a nation at all. The inhabitants of Mount Seir and the Philistines, and the stupid people living at Shechem, i.e. the Samaritans. Nice. This Samaritan saw the half-dead man. Verse 33 says, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. Or it can be translated, he had compassion upon him. But didn't the priest see the half-dead man? Yes. Didn't the Levite see the half-dead man? Yes, he did. All three saw this half-dead man. But the Samaritan really saw him and went to help. Pulled out some oil and wine to cleanse and disinfect his wounds, probably took some of his own clothes and ripped them to bandage up these wounds. He put him on his own donkey. He took him down to the inn, probably in Jericho. And he paid the innkeeper 2 denarii, which in today's money I calculated for a day labor, it's about $132 out of his pocket, and said, if there's more expenses, I'll pay those when I get back. Now we have to understand that the Samaritan in this story faces some real negative repercussions for helping this Jewish half-dead man. He could have come under attack, couldn't he have? He was a wealthy person. He had a donkey. It's hard for me to say that word donkey without thinking of a certain movie. Donkey. I just had to do it. Sorry, chapel people. He had money. He could have come under attack. It would have been easy for him to just ride on by. But there's more. Given the hatred between Samaritans and Jews, this Samaritan wouldn't be safe with a half-dead, probably Jewish man on his donkey when he goes down into Jericho. Most would have assumed that the Samaritan had done this, and he would have faced some revenge. Kenneth Bailey, who has spent 50 years in traveling the Middle East asking about Jesus' parables, he draws a parallel to the American West in 1850. He says, suppose a Native American found a cowboy with 2 arrows in his back, placed the cowboy on his own horse and rode into Dodge City. Question, how would the people of Dodge City react? Not good, probably, right? This is the context in the first century for this Samaritan person. The Good Samaritan paid a price, didn't he, to help this nearly dead man in the parable. So Jesus' answer to the question, who is my neighbor, after this long story is really simple. We really didn't need to talk for 19 minutes. Be like the Samaritan. I have 5 quick points of conclusion because it's warm in here. And because Friday, Dr. Jung, and Monday, Dr. Grace will apply this in depth. You will want to be here Friday and Monday, and it will be cooler. Jesus says to go and do likewise. The do here is a present imperative. It means to keep on doing likewise. This means we must have good theology. That's why you're at Biola, to study the Bible and to get good theology. But we must also act on that good theology. We love God and we love our neighbor, and we do good deeds to show that. But we don't just do good deeds every now and then. We don't just do them on Sundays or once a week when we go down to Long Beach to pass out brown bag lunches or during interterm on our missions trip. This do likewise is lived out every day. Every hour, every second. Keep on doing like the Good Samaritan did. Whenever we see somebody in need, we have to do what the Good Samaritan did. He risked everything, didn't he? His time, his money, his wine, his oil, his clothes, his donkey, and perhaps even his own life. This is costly compassion to love our neighbor. That's the first point. The second will calm you a little bit. It's the word balance. Now, having said that we need to keep on doing whenever, let me qualify that a little bit. If we do that, we're in trouble, aren't we? We will not have time to sleep. We will not have time to eat. We will not have time to study for your New Testament class. Sorry, did that wrong. I try to be contextualized with the modern hip stuff, but it's hard for me. There's so many needs around us, aren't there? Here at Biola, in LA, United States, expand your vision to the world. There's so many needs, we will not have time to do anything if we keep on doing. So we need a little balance here. We do, and listen to this, we do what we can do, but we can't do everything. Do what you can do, but you can't do everything. Third conclusion, do you see needs? Or are you too busy? You see the person in your class with no friends? Do you see the victims of abuse, even here on campus? Do you see the hungry? Do you see the unborn children? Do you see those who are struggling with drug abuse, alcohol abuse? Do you see the millions, billions who still need to hear the gospel? The list is endless. Do you see them? Or do you pretend to not see them? Remember when Ashley Morgan came into my John class and told us about By Grace Children's Home in Kenya? She said that they don't have much water there. I have 2 bottles here. She told us that it's a great ministry. They take kids off the streets. Their parents have died of HIV/AIDS. They give them a house, clothes, food, education, Christian education. She told me that every kid who lives in the home is now a Christian kid. It's a great ministry. She said they were trying to dig a water well, and I said, how much money do they need? Shouldn't have asked that question, right? Just go by on the other side of the road. It's so much easier. Sarcasm. How much money do they need? $1,500. So I said to my John class, can we do it? Can we raise $1,500 in a week? And we did it. I believe I have a picture. Yes, there it is. That's the water well at By Grace Children's Home. We raised it in 1 week. Now my students right now don't know this yet, but my former students know that we support 2 children every month at this children's home. We don't support all of them. We can't. Well, we probably could. But then we wouldn't be able to buy the Starbucks, right? Hope you had your guilt shield up for that one. We don't support all of them, but we support 2 of them. If we all do what we can do, we can, and here's the refrain of Biola, impact the world for the Lord Jesus Christ. Fourth, almost done. We can't miss the racial overtones of this parable. The Samaritan was a hated foreigner, an outsider, but he was the one that showed compassion. This is a sharp attack on racism, isn't it? Like Dr. Martin Luther King 50 years and 1 week ago today, I too have a dream. There should be no racism at Biola University. Can we agree on that? That's easy, right? Can we agree that at least at Biola we can start here and then we can move out? Yes? All right. Fifth and final point, parables aren't complete theologies. They don't tell us everything. This parable has focused on doing good deeds. We can't forget that we also need good words. We don't just do good deeds, but we have to preach the gospel. When I became a Christian, I found out that almost all of my friends were Christians. I didn't know that. I didn't know how to become a Christian or what a Christian was. We need good deeds that will often make people willing to hear our story, but we also need good words. We care for physical needs because people are physical, but we care for spiritual needs because people have a soul. and that soul lasts for all of eternity. It's 10:11. We have 4 minutes. We're going to sing a song. You guys can come up if you want and get set up. We're going to give you about a minute to just reflect for a second and think about what we've heard. I have a slide. Can you pop that up there? On things to reflect about. What needs have you chosen to not see? His mercy remains. We're going to hear this in the first few words of this song that we're going to sing in a minute. What keeps you from doing more? And then, since this is Spirit and Story this year, ask the Spirit to change you, and this is the song we're going to sing after a minute, from the inside out. You and I can't do this on our own. If you're like me, you're selfish, right? Okay, I'll just talk about myself. I'm selfish to the core. If you're not sure about that, ask my wife or my kids. I'm selfish. I would rather pass by on the other side of the road, if I'm honest, all too often. And so the Spirit has to move from the inside out and change us. So take a minute to reflect on that, and then we're going to sing a song. And thank you.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.